Welcome to this week's edition of World Crisis Radio. This is Webster Tarpley reporting from Washington, D.C. It's the afternoon of Friday, September 5th, 2014. We're just viewing the conclusion of the NATO summit, a monstrous festival of war psychosis, bellicose rhetoric by a gang of discredited, desperate demagogues led by perhaps the most discredited demagogue of them all, Hollande, marking the complete Sorosification of the Socialist International. Hollande now basking at 13% popularity, and not far behind him in the race to the bottom, Cameron, Colonel Blimp, Perfide Albion, personified, and his friend Clegg, who, of course, is virtually moribund with the Liberal Democrats, right? Liberal Party destroyed itself under Lloyd George in World War I, and it looks like it's going to do it again. Big question for the U.S. The British dragged you into World War I. The British dragged you into World War II. It was a little bit more complicated. But now you're going to let the British drag you into World War III? Perfide, no. And the big news, of course, from the NATO summit is the creation of a new rapid deployment force, or rapid response force in the rhetoric of the effete Cameron. The withered mummy of British imperialism struts and frets another hour on the stage, right? And the fact that this is allowed to go on indicates degeneracy, decadence, and the fecklessness of Obama, who should have pushed this entire congeries off the stage, right? Die Welt macht Ruinen, the ruins of what had once been world powers. Weltmachtruine England, Weltmachtruine Frankreich. That's what we're viewing, and we've had enough of this stuff. And this is from the good old American point of view, right? We were told this week by the Atlantic Council that the Ukrainian people get to decide whether they join NATO. Not so fast, because the American people get to say, no, we're not interested in your quarrels. We don't like your fascist, tin-horn, demagogic leadership there, Poroshenko and Yats the rats. We're sick of these people. But now we've got Cameron's invention. Cameron is the one responsible. He's claiming responsibility, and nobody denies it. Cameron has been pressing for months to get the resurrection, right, the exhuming of the NATO rapid deployment force, rapid response force. Now, and he says this will be a spearhead. Well, as my friend Tony Gosling said on Russia Today, a spearhead is the leading edge of an attack force, right? The Russians know this. They used to have a spearhead of about 75,000 troops, a shock army in East Germany, and that was going to roll all the way to the Channel, right? That was the Udar maneuver that they held every year. But now you look at it and say, well, this is not exactly an Udar with 3,500 British. I'm sure there'll be a lot of gherkins in there, right? They'll bring in some gherkins from the Raj, right, left over. They had them in the Falklands, right, the Malvinas. So it's going to be a spearhead, and this thing was abolished in 2002, and now it's being exhumed. So I say to Obama, stay a million miles away from this. As Professor Cohen points out on the Amy Goodman show today, the existence of that in itself ridiculous rapid response force is, of course, a cover for building up NATO bases in far, far eastern Europe. Specifically, Cameron is talking about a force that will have a base. The headquarters will be in Warsaw, Poland, or somewhere in Poland. And then the bases will be out in the Baltic states, in eastern Poland, and such. So this is a recipe for disaster. It is made to order for the provocateurs that are known to inhabit the British Foreign Office, the British Defense Ministry. And as we have pointed out, you've got this warmonger wing of NATO, the British, Poland, and then the three Baltic states, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, right? We heard from Poland this week. Prime Minister Tusk, who's going on to preside over the European Union, big anti-Russian number. Don't forget the guy's father was a Nazi. His grandfather was a Nazi. So Tusk comes from a Nazi family. And this Harpy Grybauskaitė, the woman there from Lithuania, right? She should be told to shut up. These are all Maulhelder. They're all people who talk big. And who's going to bleed is poor Americans, inner city blacks, Appalachian poor. That's who's going to die in the war that these Eastern European virulently Russophobic demagogues are trying to foist on us. Britain, Poland, and the three Baltic states, if states we can call them. A terrible mistake to let these people into NATO. A time bomb left ticking by Mad Dog Bush the Younger. That's the admission of these three virulently Russophobic Baltic states to NATO, right? You know, foreign policy is all based on Russophobia. Big Russian minorities, 25-30%. Mistreat them. Plenty of opportunities. You can drive the Russian public opinion crazy, and then you get your war. It's time to pull the disconnect button. Abort, abort, abort. No rapid deployment force is desirable. So war psychosis was in the air in Newport, Wales for this ridiculous event. Venomous rhetoric flying all over the place. The various heads of government and heads of state had themselves photographed in front of a jet fighter, right? Was it an F-16? What was it, right? Were they trying to sell the F-35 or some similar thing, right? So all kinds of bellicose martial posturing. And of course, most of these countries on the military level are totally insignificant. 3/4 of anything is going to come from the U.S. Let's get it clear. So the U.S. has veto power over these images, these simulacra of states, right? Staatsgebilde, and we're fed up with this. In the course of the week, we had Yatsenyuk, Yats the Rats, Nuland's friend. He wants to end the neutral status of Ukraine and join NATO. And I've already said the American people say no, so forget it. You should solve your own problems. We can't have this coming into NATO. We're told that more sanctions are in the works. Well, more sanctions will quite possibly come just in time. They'll coincide with a moment of exaggerated weakness or typical weakness in the Western financial system. Are we looking at some kind of an September-October crash? Is this possible? I think we now, quite a few years after 2007, 2008, we've got to think about this again. I'll try to get to it as we have time. Merkel is not exactly a profile in courage, is she? There is this other group in NATO, right? It's called Germany, France, Italy, Spain. It's a large group. They're not interested in confrontation. Well, where are they? We saw some of them cavorting there, right? Where are they? Why don't they stand up and say, look, this has gone far enough? And we're also told that U.S. forces are going to go there. I had tweeted during the week, and I'll get to this in just a second, what I tweeted during the week. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley in Washington, D.C. Notice that little Rand Paul has flipped on his isolationist anti-war rhetoric. Rand Paul, ever sensitive to the humors of the fascisto-Republican Party, is now a full-fledged warmonger. How embarrassing for certain personalities to see Rand Paul unmasked as a warmonger. The question from Bloomberg today was, who is this guy anyway, right? He flips and flops. He's against drones. He's for drones. He's anti-war. Total opportunism. So if that's what you want, and he's not even a blank slate because he's taken all kinds of positions. We'll be back to that in a minute. I detect the rumblings of Romney. Romney may be at the gates again. Get that book, Just Too Weird, Tarpley.net, and you'll be forearmed. But now the Rapid Trident is coming. This is what I had in my Twitter feed during the week. Rapid Trident is now confirmed. It's a NATO exercise on the ground in Ukraine, as I had suspected. And you heard this from Perfide Cameron in the House of Commons. And he said in passing, and by the way, we'll have forces there for an exercise in Ukraine before the end of the year. That's Rapid Trident. The last one we had, Sea Breeze or Breeze, back in July, was the cover for the shooting down of the MH17 Malaysian airliner, Yabol. And not good, huh? So what's Rapid Trident going to be the cover for? Cohen, usefully, pointed out to Amy Goodman, who was gaping, that the entire evidence, right, there is no report on the Malaysian airliner. The report is conducted by a consortium, including the Australian and Dutch governments, U.S. allies, warmongers, British puppets in the case of both, and they're blocking any release of the report. So the information is worthy of being suppressed, and the Ukrainians, for their part, are suppressing the tapes coming from Kiev Airport Tower, where, of course, we have that interesting Spanish air traffic controller. So you're going to go to war on the basis of hearsay? I've been trying to show you what a fraud Sarajevo was. Check my broadcast this week on rents, and you will hear the story of the British pre-1914, pre-July, pre-August 1914 ops. Welcome to this week's edition of World Crisis Radio. This is Webster Tarpley reporting from Washington, D.C. It's the afternoon of Friday, September 5th, 2014. We're just viewing the conclusion of the NATO summit, a monstrous festival of war psychosis, bellicose rhetoric by a gang of discredited, desperate. And the big news, of course, from the NATO summit is the creation of a new rapid deployment force, or rapid response force in the rhetoric of the effete Cameron. The withered mummy of British imperialism struts and frets another hour on the stage, right? And the fact that this is allowed to go on indicates degenerate, and his friend Clegg, who, of course, is virtually moribund with the Liberal Democrats, right? Liberal Party destroyed itself under Lloyd George in World War I, and it looks like it's going to do it again. Big question for the U.S. The British dragged you into World War I. The British dragged you into World War II. It was a little bit more complicated. But now you're going to let the British drag you into World War III? Perfide, no. Demagogues led by perhaps the most discredited demagogue of them all, Hollande, marking the complete Sorosification of the Socialist International. Hollande now basking at 13% popularity, and not far behind him in the race to the bottom, Cameron, Colonel Blimp, Perfide Albion, personified. The decadence and the fecklessness of Obama, who should have pushed this entire congeries off the stage, right? Die Weltmachtruinen, the ruins of what had once been world powers. Weltmachtruine England, Weltmachtruine Frankreich. That's what we're viewing, and we've had enough of this stuff. And this is from the good old American point of view, right? We were told